Mazagan was standing in Martyr Famada Square, waiting for a car to take her home. She was looking around, not just at the street, but at everyone passing by. She had already heard the local news about the killer who targets women at night. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a motorcycle. It stopped in front of her, and she found herself facing a man in his late 30s. She tried to ignore him and look away, but he spoke to her, saying, "Are you waiting for someone? It looks to me like you don't have money, am I right? I have a voucher for rice and oil at home that I don't use. What do you think about sitting behind me on the motorcycle and coming with me to get it?" Mazagan was in desperate need of money, but she felt scared because of what she had heard about a killer targeting women. So, she refused. The motorcyclist then rode away. At that moment, the park guard in the square, who had overheard their conversation, spoke to Mazagan after the driver left, saying, "I know him. He is a good person. He must have genuinely wanted to give you a rice voucher." A few days later, while she was standing in the same spot, the same motorcyclist approached her again and offered her the rice voucher in exchange for going with him to his house. Remembering the park guard's words that he was trustworthy, she agreed and got on the motorcycle. As they neared his house, he asked her to cover her face with a hijab to avoid any gossip, and she agreed. In his yard, she stood admiring a beautifully large mulberry tree until he pulled her by the arm inside and took her upstairs to her room. He asked her to lay her headscarf on the floor and put all her clothes, her bag, and everything she had in it so that if anyone came, she could gather everything together and nothing would be left in the room. She did as he asked, but suddenly, she found the driver standing behind her, wrapping the scarf around her neck to strangle her. She immediately turned and hit him hard, causing him to fall to the ground in pain. She started screaming, which scared him into opening the door to let her out. She grabbed her things and ran out of the house in terror, looking back in fear until she got home. She closed the door, not believing she had just escaped death, but she couldn't tell the police about it, fearing the punishment she might face. Saeed Hanaei was born in Mashhad, Iran, on April 16, 1962, into a middle-class family. He has 6 siblings, and his mother worked as a seamstress. She raised him with strict rules against interacting with girls or even being near them. At the age of 16, Saeed suffered from severe nosebleeds and became seriously ill for a long time. His mother took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with cyclical insanity and prescribed lithium tablets for him to take regularly. As a young man, Saeed worked as an ambulance driver, transporting bodies from Iraq to Tehran during the Iran-Iraq War. After returning to his hometown, he resumed his old job as a construction worker, got married, and had 3 children. During this period, he frequently got into fights, became aggressive, and his psychological problems started to surface early in his adulthood. He was admitted to a mental hospital twice, but each time he stayed only briefly before escaping. Despite being recorded in the hospital files as antisocial and dangerous, the authorities overlooked him, and he did not adhere to his prescribed treatment, causing his condition to worsen. One day, he found his wife rushing into their home, out of breath, with scratches on her face. He asked her what happened, and she replied that she had been in a taxi when the driver started staring at her through the mirror. The driver then stopped the car and made an inappropriate proposition, mistaking her for a prostitute. When she refused, he tried to assault her, forcing her to fight back and throw him out of the car before running home. Hearing this story filled Saeed with intense anger. He took his wife to the taxi stand to seek revenge, but they couldn't find the driver. They then went to the police station to file a report, but his wife couldn't clearly remember the driver's face. The police, overwhelmed by the rampant crime, handled their complaint with indifference, further fueling Saeed's rage. You might think the matter ended there, but unfortunately, it didn't. Saeed obsessively pondered how to get revenge. Initially, he thought about killing taxi drivers, but given their numbers and strength, it would be impossible to tackle them alone and would put him at great risk. So, he considered another plan, targeting prostitutes. He believed that if they didn't exist, the driver wouldn't have mistaken his wife for one, and she wouldn't have been assaulted in the first place. He chose his first victim, Afsani Karimpour, whom he picked up from the street and took to his home while his wife and children were away. After spending some time with her, as she was about to leave, She paused to admire the ceramic flowers his wife had crafted. Taking advantage of the moment, Saeed struck her from behind, causing her to fall face first to the ground. He placed his left knee on her waist and pressed down on her throat with all his strength. Then he turned her over and wrapped her scarf around her neck until she stopped breathing and her eyes bulged. He took her body to his backyard, started digging, but reconsidered burying her there. Instead, he wrapped her body in an old carpet, took it out of the city on his motorcycle, and dumped it far away. From that day on, killing prostitutes he picked up from the streets of Mashhad became Saeed Hanaei's favorite pastime, along with stealing whatever they had after engaging in physical relations. On August 10th, just 3 days later, another woman's body was found under tomato bushes near Bin Arab in Mashhad. Over time, the outskirts of Mashhad became littered with the bodies of prostitutes. Saeed followed the media coverage of his crimes with keen interest, especially as some newspapers nicknamed him the Spider Killer. Some papers reported that some of these women had prior criminal records related to prostitution, which made the public less sympathetic and bolstered Saeed's ego, allowing him to justify his crimes as morally righteous. His audacity reached the point where he would help the police as a good Samaritan to carry the bodies of the women he had coldly murdered, mocking the system. One day, after burying his 11th victim, he wandered the streets of Mashhad as rain began to fall, soaking his face. Although rain is usually seen as a good omen, especially after a long drought, to Saeed, the rain felt like a blessing, affirming his twisted sense of moral purpose in cleansing the streets of prostitutes. After this day of respite, he claimed 5 more victims. The police were arresting a large number of women who were loitering after midnight, including Mazgan, whom we met at the beginning of. She was wandering the city streets drunk when a policeman saw her and arrested her. At the station, she bitterly complained about the police's bullying of helpless women while letting the real criminal roam free, killing them one by one. When the officer asked her to explain, she told him what had happened at the house of the motorcycle driver. The police immediately took her in an attempt to identify the house, but she couldn't remember anything except for a giant mulberry tree in the front yard of the criminal's house. They then took her to the square to see if she could identify the guard who had spoken to her that day, but he was nowhere to be found. By chance, they encountered a relative of the guard, who regularly visited during his shifts. He recognized the description Mazgan provided and said the driver was named Saeed Hanaei. A large number of police officers went to Saeed's house, hid and armed, waiting for him. They assumed he was part of a criminal gang, but they were shocked to discover that he was the sole perpetrator with an insatiable desire to kill. The entire country learned about Saeed Hanaei's identity, and the press began glorifying him, portraying him as a national hero on a mission to cleanse the city of vice. The police conspired with the press to conceal a crucial part of the investigation. Before killing his victims, their hero would engage in fornication with them and steal their gold jewelry and money, some of which he gave to his wife. The police promised Saeed's family to keep this aspect hidden. His relatives even raised blood money for the victims' families, selling Saeed's house to cover the remaining amount. Influential figures intervened to appoint a skilled lawyer to defend him. All the victims' families accepted the money except for one, who refused and would not relinquish their daughter's rights despite the scorn they faced from the majority who supported the killer's war against vice. Saeed's 14-year-old son defended him in court, claiming his father was cleansing the republic of the corruptors of the earth, and many will replace him if he is killed. He asserted that 20 people had asked him to continue his father's work, but he told them, "Let's wait and see." Saeed boasted in court, stating, "Everyone who met me knows I was a religious person. During Ramadan, I completed my fasts and prayers. Everyone saw that, and I never drank alcohol." At the end of the hearing, Hanaei's wife told reporters, "Saeed always said that a woman who willingly goes to a man's house she doesn't know deserves death. Saeed didn't kill people. He fought corruption. One feels shame and disgrace for murder, but not Saeed. He didn't know his actions were illegal. I never saw bad behavior from him. Even now, I'm not afraid that he killed anyone. I only think about his freedom." As for Saeed, he said he felt proud for killing 16 cockroaches and remained calm and indifferent to the charges against him, confident he would escape the gallows. People encouraged him to see himself as their heroic savior, and he was overwhelmed by their love and support. Amidst the ongoing events both inside and outside the courtroom, the police, for reasons still unknown, suddenly turned against Saeed without prior warning. They declared that he had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital twice and labeled him a dangerous person. Additionally, they released a forensic report stating that he had committed adultery with the victims shortly before killing them and stealing their belongings. Initially, he denied the charges against him, but over time, he admitted to stealing their possessions after killing them, while he continuously denied the adultery accusations. Ultimately, he was sentenced to execution by kisses and flogging before his execution. As for the victims' families, 12 of them couldn't even afford the funeral costs. The father of one of the victims said, "My daughter got married when she was 10 years old. When she turned 20, her husband took another wife, despite having 6 children. Since then, his neglect and lack of support for the children forced her to the streets. My daughter had to do whatever she could to make money." Saeed Hanaei stated, "I killed 16 women since August 7th of last year. I have no regrets for my actions whatsoever, and if I hadn't been caught, I plan to increase the number of murders to 150. I wanted to show everyone that prostitution and promiscuity lead to no good end." While awaiting execution, he still believed he would be saved, but he was executed and hanged on the morning of April 28, 2001, at the age of 40. The story of the serial killer Saeed has inspired many, leading to several films, including the 2002 documentary And Along Came a Spider, directed by Iranian Mazir Bari, which includes an interview with Saeed Hanaei. In 2020, a film titled Killer Spider was produced, followed by another film 2 years later about his life, Holy Spider, which was entered into the main competition section of the Cannes Film Festival that same year.